Greetings. One of the things that we can do over here in our exploration of artificial intelligence applications, including ones that help us learn things faster or produce output more quickly, is to see how certain ChatGPT queries manifest. So this is a laboratory that I call ChatGPT Laboratory, and I will post queries on a wide range of subjects that are not just basic answers that are spit out, but examples of how one has to post a question in multiple formats or improve and refine the question to get the type of answer you want that is outright meaningful. And yes, the general knowledge of the person who is typing in the query into ChatGPT does matter in terms of assessing whether the answer is any good or not, as I will demonstrate in this video. So this will be a multi-part series that we call ChatGPT Laboratory. So I'm going to go through a few questions that I posted in recent days. And the first one is, how many people lived in the western states of the United States, of course, after the U.S. took them from Mexico? So this happened in 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and this is the detailed answer that ChatGPT delivered. The Gadsden Purchase in 1853 was another noteworthy event, but it includes a state-by-state list that is quite useful in telling us what that region was like at this time. The only place that had a significant number of people, and by significant we mean 150,000 to 200,000 people, was Texas. Even California had only 14 to 15,000 people in 1848. But a year later, 1849, the very famous gold rush caused a huge number of people to go to California, and the population increased by a factor of more than 20 to 380,000. But before 1849, California had only 14 or 15,000 people. New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, and other western states had almost nothing. So in 1848, these states all put together had maybe 230,000 people, two-thirds of whom were in Texas, which is the easternmost state out of these western states. So that is interesting because today these states combined easily have 100 million people. Now moving on to a very different subject, I post this question just to see the type of answer that comes in. Is ChatGPT left-wing? Because many U.S. Republicans actually claim that ChatGPT is left-wing. But is that really true, and can AI even be programmed to have a bias based on current political preferences at all? So obviously ChatGPT claims that it does not have any political biases. That in and of itself is not something you should take at face value, because nobody who is left-wing thinks that they program their software to be left-wing. So then we go to the next question, can ChatGPT simulate a debate between a Democrat and a Republican? This again is very US-centric because there's a lot of political ideologies and debates that fall outside of the narrow US framework as well. But it did create this debate that covers a couple of topics. Now it's very boilerplate. It is something that could be taught to children in school about what the generic positions of these two parties are, but it's not biased to make Republicans look bad necessarily. In fact, it makes a Republican case better than a lot of actual Republicans of 2023 because many of them seem trained to make the weakest possible argument for their case. None of us should be surprised if it eventually comes out that many prominent Republicans are actually actors that are paid by Democrats to make Republican debate points very weak. That should not surprise anyone at all. But this is what we're seeing over here in terms of a simulated debate generated by ChatGPT, talking about healthcare and taxes. Very generic, but not really tilted, and it's quite detailed and lengthy. So that's interesting. Next question. Can you summarize modern monetary theory? Now, modern monetary theory is the next closest thing to my atom thesis, but it's very primitive by comparison because modern monetary theory does not account for technological deflation nor for the accelerating rate of change. That's why it's unable to explain why money printing has not caused inflation. It also does not prioritize a lowering of taxes, whereas I say a monetization of technological deflation should be a path to the lowering of taxes, because 0% taxes on humans would not just be an emancipation extinction of all human workers, but it is the necessary progression of all productivity, because to tax human productivity is to hold human prosperity back. You can monetize technological deflation instead to fund the various functions of the government. And the atom thesis gets conflated with modern monetary theory, but in reality, modern monetary theory is to the atom what the Wright brothers' airplane was to a modern hypersonic jet. But it is the next closest thing. And it talks about currency issuance, importance of functional finance, job guarantees, inflation management, etc. Critics of modern monetary theory argue that it may lead to inflationary pressures. Of course, what else is new? That's always the go-to explanation to prevent anything that might actually cause improvements from being implemented. But at least this answer from ChatGPT is relatively detailed and tells us something comprehensive about modern monetary theory rather than just a headline level one-sentence description. So that is good. Now moving on to more advanced questions that cannot automatically be found just from a Google search. If you did a Google search for this type of question, you would have to hope that there was a specific article written about exactly your query and that that article is easy for you to find. With ChatGPT, you don't have to wait for someone else to have written an article that you hope to find on Google. So my question was England of 900 AD, so this is when England was unified, this is after Alfred the Great, but before William the Conqueror, was England of 900 AD more technologically advanced than Rome in Julius Caesar's time? Now that's a complicated question because Julius Caesar was a good 950 years before England of 900 AD, and England was occupied by the Romans many centuries before 900 AD, so you would think England of 900 AD would be more technologically advanced, but we happen to know it wasn't due to a combination of multiple events that occurred in both places. And so what's the answer from ChatGPT? In terms of technology, it is generally believed that the Roman Empire during Julius Caesar's time was more advanced than England in 900 AD. The Romans had made significant advancements in engineering, architecture, infrastructure, and military technology. During the time of Julius Caesar, Rome had sophisticated engineering techniques such as the construction of aqueducts, roads, and monumental buildings. In contrast, England in 900 AD was in the midst of the early medieval period, also known as the Dark Ages. This era saw a decline in technological and societal development following the fall of the Western Roman Empire. England was characterized by smaller, scattered settlements and limited infrastructure. Skipping to the end, overall in terms of technological advancements, the Roman Empire during Julius Caesar's era is considered more advanced compared to England in 900 AD. So this is a pretty sophisticated and accurate answer to a question that has a lot of variables and a lot of subjectivity to it, and a question to which you would probably not find a very precise answer on Google. You would have to piece together information from a lot of sources. So this took a time-consuming effort and gave us a very quick, concise answer. And now we can do similar comparisons about other nations. Was India of 1000 AD more advanced than England of 1000 AD? So a similar question, but now the same time period, not comparing two different time periods, the same time period, but two very different countries that had no interaction at this time, but had a lot of interaction much later. In terms of technological advancements, India in 1000 AD was generally considered to be more advanced than England in 1000 AD. During this time, India was experiencing a period of significant cultural, scientific, and technological development, while England was still in the early stages of the Middle Ages. And then it lists the technological areas in which India excelled: architecture and engineering, mathematics and astronomy, medicine and healthcare, trade and commerce, textiles and crafts. So a long, detailed answer, 1000 AD to 1000 AD. Now perhaps we can choose a more recent time. Was India of 1500 AD more technologically advanced than England of 1500 AD, so now 500 years further ahead? During the 1500s, India and England had different levels of technological development, and it is difficult to make a direct comparison of overall technological advancement. However, it can be argued that certain aspects of India's technological landscape were more advanced than those of England during that period. So it's still saying that India is more advanced. The advantage is not as decisive as it was in 1000 AD, but India is still more advanced. Okay, let's pose this question again, but choose a date closer to the present where the crossover was probably in the past. Was India of 1700 AD more technologically advanced than England of 1700 AD? During the 1700s, England had a higher level of technological advancement compared to India. So now the tables have turned. India was more advanced in 1000 AD and 1500 AD, and certainly all times before 1000 AD. But by 1700 AD, England had an industrial revolution, whereas India was in the early stages of decline. And this is before British colonization of India. That only began in 1757. So 1700 AD, even though the answer says 1700s, which is a little different than what I actually had requested, England was more advanced. And it gives the categorizations as well. But these are very good answers because I chose a comparison between two countries and I chose specific dates, and it gave answers that pinpointed the time at which one that was behind became the one that was ahead. So that is very sophisticated and high quality, and you can learn a lot about historical trends and progressions through things like this. This is not something you can just put into Google and get an answer of this quality. You would have to synthesize a lot of different points. And people who pursue PhDs in history that didn't have these tools even just a few years ago, they would spend a lot of time. Their PhD dissertation would be over something like this, and they would have to spend hundreds of hours researching such minutiae. Think of the productivity enhancement in just learning about a particular subtopic of a subtopic here. Okay, now we'll go to another type of question. Why are there so few time travel stories in films? Time travel happens to be my favorite genre of fiction, and there's very few good stories and films about it. The ones that are good are very good, but there are very few because it's quite difficult to make a really good time travel film or even write a really good time travel novel. Why is that? So it gives a good answer. Complexity and narrative challenges. These are stories and films that happen to be catered to perhaps the very high IQ crowd and not the most lucrative part of the bell curve, which is the middle of the bell curve, market demand and trends. So a pretty good answer about why this is. So I say, now what was one of the very first actual time travel stories ever written? A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, written by Mark Twain. So I type in a query requesting a summarization of this story, which you can do for any fictional story in ChatGPT if you don't have the time to read that story. So it's written by Mark Twain, published in 1889, and it follows the story of a 19th century person who goes back to the medieval kingdom of King Arthur. Now, was King Arthur really a real person, and what time did he live in? We will look at that next. But then it summarizes the story about how someone from the 19th century going back to the 5th century has all sorts of culture clashes and is unable to force the change that he wants to see because of the entrenchment of existing power structures. And it summarizes the story as a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court serves as a satirical commentary on society, meaning 19th century society as the more modern of the two, contrasting the values and practices of the medieval world with the advancements of the industrial age. So this is arguably one of the very first true time travel stories, and it was written in 1889. So I asked the next question, when did King Arthur exist? Because arguably this was not a real person, but an amalgamation of a number of small kings and chieftains into someone who could be converted into a story and then is made famous by a number of literary works in the following centuries, one of which was Mark Twain's writing. The historical existence of King Arthur, a legendary figure from medieval literature and mythology, remains a topic of debate among scholars. The traditional narrative places King Arthur in the early medieval period, specifically between the 5th and 6th centuries. However, the lack of concrete historical evidence and the blending of historical events with mythical elements make it challenging to pinpoint an exact time frame for his existence. Okay, such a person may have existed, or they may have created a composite of several individuals of that era, but 5th or 6th centuries. So even Mark Twain's novel was ultimately going to the court of a king who may not have actually existed, but was just used as a setting for the story. Okay, with that, I've given you a lot of ideas of what you can do with ChatGPT, which all of you are already using, but you should expand your ambitions higher because the scale of what you can do is huge. And I'm going to go through a lot of these different categories of tests that I have run on this system. And we're also going to track the rate of its improvement because as people use it, it improves very fast, at a rate much faster than Google improved back in the day, on account of the accelerating rate of change. But this was episode 1 of ChatGPT Laboratory. Episode 2 soon to follow. Thanks for watching.